I think the biggest issue of all must be age discrimination, because that actually stops older people getting jobs in the first place, particularly those who have been working for a long time, come out of work, maybe it's redundancy or for other reasons, and if they want another job, they have to go back in and compete against people who are who have maybe less experience and everything else. But the fundamental thing, that, particularly in a recession, is many employers are looking at the bottom line, looking at salary, that people have to give higher salaries to people who are older and more experienced. And this often works against older workers and older adults in particular.
To put it bluntly, I don't think some people see age discrimination as necessarily something that's bad. I think some people see it as quite fair, and that would include individuals themselves. There's still a mindset, I think, that people have that I've worked for 40 years, I've worked for 35 years, it's time I moved on to greener pastures or to leave my job to someone who's younger. I don't think that's uncommon, perhaps becoming less common, but I still think it's there. I think people are less cautious about how they talk about age and discrimination, far more so than they are, say, about disability or race. They're more open, I think, in talking about their prejudices because it's not seen as to be as hostile in that sense. So I think people tend to think, because age, I mean, the stereotypes in age discrimination works both ways. It's not just about older people, it can be about younger people. And I think there are less social constrictions about talking about that.
A lot of employers are aware that the aging of the population is an issue they have to reckon with, but they expect that people will work longer, but they don't expect that people will work longer in their own organization. So there are many issues involved here. It's negative stereotyping. All the workers are praised for their loyalty, their social skills, etc. But they are valued much less than younger workers on so-called hard skills. It's a complex pattern of stereotypes you see towards older workers and younger workers. And older workers are rated much lower because of those weak, hard skills. Employers have a preference for a younger workforce.
However, I think older workers have been less affected by unemployment compared to previous recessions for various reasons. One of them is that employers are not willing to pay out large sums in terms of redundancy money. So they're trying to get rid of workers who have less service with them, so they're cheaper to get rid of. There's also the issue of skills to consider. So if an organisation gets rid of an older worker who has a huge amount of experience and skills, that isn't easy to replace after the recession when the company wants to pick up its business again, and therefore they're trying to find other means by which they can hold on to older workers and other workers to try and tie them over the recession.
There is a growing movement within the United Kingdom in particular, but also elsewhere in Europe, that looks at about improving the quality of work, because that will improve the quality of retirement. And I think employers, indeed good employers, should always look at those issues.
One of the main issues that I look at is around working conditions. And one of the problems in how we think about whether people are fit enough to carry on working in older age is that we talk about people who are completely unable to work and then people who are fit for work. And that's just how everybody talks about it in public, political, and quite a lot of academic debate as well. But that's not really what it means to be fit for work or not. There's a lovely quote from one of the people that helped found the LSE and various other things in the early 20th century, when there's a big panic about the equivalent of incapacity benefits in the 1910s, saying, well, completely incapacitated for work means literally asleep or dead, because anybody else is in a position that they could do something. So what we're interested is in what things can people not do, and how does that relate to the things that jobs these days ask them to do. And so one of the big problems is that work has been changing. And we think that work has been changing in a way that it gets better. You know, we have fewer people that go down into the pits than there used to be. In a lot of ways, you know, work is clearly a lot better than it was for a lot of people 150 years ago. But compared to, say, 30 years or so ago, a lot of things about jobs have got worse. So, for example, people now have to work harder than they used to. There's been a general intensification of work. And it's not just asking people, do you think you work harder than you used to? But actually reliable evidence that people do have to work harder than they used to. People have got less control over how they do their job, what speed they do their job at, for all of this talk of flexibility. And that whole career progression to light work. You work in a pit, then you work on the surfaces later in life. You work in a factory, and then you work in the inventory, just handing things out to people later in life. The cinema ushers, the gardeners, etc. That light work has disappeared. So in fact, we've got a lot of good reasons to think that the sort of jobs that older people find easier to do are disappearing, and that it's in fact more difficult for them to be fit for work. Not that they're completely incapable for any work, but the sorts of things they can do are difficult for them to find. And this leads on to the third and in a way most important point, that if you've got a problem with your health and it clashes with the sort of job you're doing, then you might be lucky enough for an employer to make an adjustment to your job to do things, and that's inequitably available between people. But the easiest thing to do in a lot of ways is just to find a job that you can do. And so you end up with people who find it difficult to get other jobs. And, you know, older workers in general find it harder to get other jobs, particularly if they have low skills. People with health problems can end up in a situation where they're not fit enough to do the jobs they can get, but they're not employable enough to get the jobs that they can do. So it all comes back to not thinking about can older workers do any work or no work, but this grey area in between where people are trapped in incapacity. And this is what I think is one of the really big issues at the moment.
The research that I've done with older people themselves, and actually older managers for this particular piece of research, has shown that people want to stop working in various ways. And it's not anything to do with this cliff edge notion of retirement. It's not necessarily linked to them drawing a pension. And it overwhelmingly shows that by and large most people want to keep working in some form or another for a long time after the time when you might think they'd formally left work. So it's this drive for productive activity, whether or not it's paid or unpaid, depending on their financial circumstances, but the fact that people want interest and they want contribution in later life, and we're not nearly looking at that enough.
Nobody seems really to be addressing the issue of what have we got to do to change the nature of work. I mean, if we're talking about people working into their late 60s and early 70s, and we're not in a position where people are able to make a choice of changing the time in which they work, down stepping into a different sort of role, preserving their working lives over a longer period of time, developing their careers so that they move into different jobs, using their knowledge in more creative ways in organisations, then that is a big problem.
I think the law will have an effect. It's going to make people far more conscious because of the removal of the default retirement age. But I think it's too soon to say what an effect that might have on prejudice within the workplace. I think people might become a bit more wary of it, but it will require them to think more about performance management issues.
The other aspect is the way that the abolishing of the default retirement age is being implemented and how that's going to be working in practice. The recommendations from DWP and the likes of ACAS, for example, is that any issues in terms of performance and working should be dealt with via performance management tools, and that is across all ages. However, those tools are now being recommended also for use for age-specific issues, such as talking about retirement. And I think there's a blurring there between the issue of retirement and something that is was intended for a different purpose in terms of performance management.
There are a lot of things going on in other countries, and we've been looking at some of them. The French have now got a law in place that entitles a worker of 47 to have a career development interview. In Germany, the German federal government has supported a program for training demographic guides, individual consultants, actually, independent consultants who will go into companies and together with their normal role as HR consultants in many cases, are equipped to give age management consultancy on a wide range of issues, analysing the age-related risks and so on in the organisation. So I think these are the sorts of things that we should be doing. Instead, we're focusing simply on the issue of, well, first of all, are employers going to adjust to the idea of working without mandatory retirement? But actually, it's the wrong collection of issues that they're focusing on. They need to be more proactive in terms of the maintenance of the capacity of individuals and the ability of them to perform at a high level as they exercise their choices to remain in the workforce longer, or indeed as they need to be encouraged to remain in the workforce longer in order to provide the manpower to do the jobs that are still going to need to be done, despite the fact that we've got, in some areas, a loss of skills and a shrinking population.